So why don't we start in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. A reading from the book of Proverbs. Live as children of the light, for the light produces every kind of goodness and righteousness and truth. Try to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in fruitless works of darkness. Rather, expose them. For it is shameful even to mention these things done in secret. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible. For everything that becomes visible is light. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So I just want to start off of that because we're still kind of discussing kind of the darkness, but I like that because the darkness, even in our own church, has to be exposed. To me, it's kind of like if you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you that you have cancer and you say, I don't like talking about depressing things. Then he'll kill you. Does that? So we're really at just chapter 3, and he goes over the history. Baron goes over, we've been there before. And he gives kind of this historical perspective. He recounts the misdeeds and the outrageous sins of priests and bishops and popes. And he shows how the Catholic Church always emerged on the other side. And I do think it's kind of funny because every single time, if you study Catholic history, somebody will say, this is going to be the end of the Catholic Church. And we end up being the grave diggers from whatever it was. I do believe we'll survive, but we do have to expose things to the light. And I like how he mentioned that St. Newman said, the whole course, I like this quote, the whole course of Christianity is but one series of troubles and disorders. Every century is like the other. And to those who live in it, it seems the worst of times before it. The church is ever ailing. Religion ever seems expiring. Schisms dominate. The light of truth dimming. Its adherents scattered. The cause of Christ is ever in the last agony. And yet we survive. So I just like that. And if you study from the Old Testament to the New Testament, which expands from Neolithic times to modern times, centuries and centuries, really, the church has always been having scandals. Usually, it's only the scholars that really know them, or people who study history. Now with the internet, everybody knows scandals. They know scandals that don't even exist thanks to the internet. But the funny part is, if you look at scripture and history, wherever you have human beings, there'll be sin, even within the church. But the only real choice we have is rather not if there's going to be sin, but if the church is going to tolerate it. And now, and this is my perspective, with the new atheists, they'll use whatever sin as propaganda to just give up on faith. And so I think Barron does a really great job of covering both the scandals and people's reaction to it. He mentions St. Benedict goes to Rome. He's disgusted at the scandals in Rome. So Benedict retreats and he goes, works on his own holiness. Other people attract to him. The Benedictine order has been around for 1,500 years. And when Europe was falling apart, it was the Benedictines that kept everything together. And this odd part, you have to kind of say, well, the good part about the scandal of Benedict in Benedict's time, he created this force that outlasted it by centuries and gave future centuries stability. And one of my favorite is St. Peter Damian. And St. Peter Damian, he's also kind of this hermit, works on his own holiness, but this strange pope becomes pope. And even Damian, I just like Damian's description of him, couldn't tell whether he was a good pope or a bad pope. He called him a holy Satan. And he said he was as hard as a diamond. And Peter Damian exposes that really it's the most like today. Peter Damian's critique, because there's all this pedophilia. And worse than the pedophilia, the thing that just angered him was bishops or religious leaders doing nothing. So Barron puts in a good quote where he says, Peter Damian said, "Listen, you do-nothing superiors of clerics and priests. Listen, and even now you feel sure of yourself, trembling at the thought that you are partners in the guilt of others. Those, I mean, who wink at the sins of their subjects that need correction, who by ill-considered silence allow them license to sin." Do you want another chair? Are you sure? Oh, just make your daughter sit on the floor. But the thing about it is, it's the most liked today, and so the Pope at the time, this is just a really weird bit of history. The Pope at the time had two advisors, St. Peter Damian and this other guy who really was a sociopath. The sociopath said, well, with these bishops and the pedophilia, he said, just fire all the bishops, drive them out. And Peter Damian says, no, if a bishop has committed a crime, hold him accountable. But you just can't fire all the bishops. What Peter Damian advocated was kind of structural changes to prevent these bishops coming forward, holding bishops accountable and changing the structure. Does that make sense? So Peter wanted to address it by changing the structure. Now the Pope at the time does this really weird thing. He takes neither advice. And what he does is, because there's also financial scandal as well. There's pedophilia and financial scandal. I don't know why, but whenever you have abuse, you always have abuse of money. It always goes with it. So the Pope at the time, in the 1100s, he says, well, I know the solution. We're going to make every priest take a vow of celibacy. Believe it or not, it did help. It cleared up the financial corruption because you couldn't pass on wealth, or made it more difficult to. So it did kind of help, but he never enacted any structural changes to hold pedophiles and bishops who tolerate it accountable. Does that make sense? So a lot of times people say, well, when did celibacy start? For monks, it always was. For priests, it only started in the 1100s. So, and it started because of scandal. I think he should have followed the advice of Peter Damian and make structural changes. The next scandal really comes with John Paul I. And John Paul I, really, if you study him, it's a little provocative, because John Paul I, he's the one who first decried in the modern church that there are pedophiles among us. And these pedophile priests always attack the children. Like, he was actually pretty open about the abuses, and he wanted several structural changes. One, he wanted psychological testing in seminaries for any pedophiles. And he wanted the Vatican Bank to reform itself. And even though he was in good health, surprisingly, once he started to act these changes, he dies. A lot of people think there's a scandal there. I personally do. No, I really do, because it's just such a weird thing. He starts to address scandals, and then a guy in good health is suddenly dead, and the people who found him are flown out of the Vatican. Usually, if a pope dies, they cut off a finger, just in case he becomes a saint. You can make relics. He wasn't cut off. You didn't know that? Oh, yeah. Don't worry, I'll die with all 10 fingers. But like, it was kind of interesting. John Paul I first is the one who first spoke out and wrote about the pedophile scandal. I don't know.
1978.
Was it 19? How do you know that?
Because my daughter was born that year.
Oh, wow.
And the year she was born, there were 3 popes.
Wow. Okay, I was in 8th grade. No, 7th grade? Something like that. Anyhow, so John Paul II dies. None of the reforms happen. But here's the amazing part. So when people say, well, the church hierarchy didn't know about it, even John Paul I spoke and wrote that we need to make these changes. That's the shocking part. John Paul II and Benedict, they never addressed it. And I can't make excuses for them, but they simply never addressed it. Maybe they were just very uncomfortable with it, who knows? But that's a really odd part. Although it's a very uncomfortable subject. By the way, if you want to see a great movie, see The Two Popes. I thought it was really good on kind of understanding their perspectives. Maybe Benedict just didn't have the type of personality to deal with uncomfortable news. I'm a little that way. But really, with this, what you discover is that there were people in the hierarchy who knew. And but mandatory reporting, one of the teachers said this after the last class, mandatory reporting of child abuse as a teacher didn't start until the 1980s. So even before that in the 50s, nobody wanted to talk about stuff like this. So Barron comes up with, he goes over these scandals, and then he has these discussion questions. So I'm going to read the questions, and then actually, I know this is unfair, I was going to give my reaction first, because I have a lot of opinions. But he says, compare the accounts of sexual dysfunction and past church scandals. 1, what are the similarities and difference? 2, what lessons are evident by our past? I think the first thing is, really, this is what I always think. The lives of evil people are always the same. Evil people are always the same. It's always sex and power and money. Boring. The lives of saints, I always find colorful and unique. But in 4,000 years, not much has changed. Evil people always act the same way. They use power, sex, and money, and then they cloak themselves in this sheep's clothing of goodness. It should always be shocking when wolves dress in sheep's clothing. It would only be more shocking when the clothing, the mask that they wear, is religiosity. But if you study church scandals, what are the similarities and differences? It's always the same. But they always depend upon a system that allows the crime to continue. So Barron Need mentions in this section the need to fight careerism in the church. But he never says how to fight the careerism. That's where I think he kind of pulled his punch again. Yeah, he mentions there's careerism, and believe me, that's part of the problem. Because you have these people who are so addicted to getting ahead, they never want to cause trouble. So since he didn't want to mention suggestions, I have some. Number 1, you have to remove careerism in the system of power. Barron admits the lust of power for bishops made victims more likely to be raped and then covered up. Peter Damian also mentions that the lust for power and the pedophilia goes hand in hand. That's why you needed systematic reforms. And the part that still irritates me is that he mentions the McCarrick scandal, brave of him, but doesn't really mention most of the hierarchy knew about it. Now here's the really odd part. I didn't know about the complete thing, but even me, in Meridian, Idaho, before the McCarrick scandal hit, I knew about it. Because I was talking to this other priest, who then was talking to this other priest. I'll just tell you the true story. That's when McCarrick was in Washington, D.C., and this priest was kind of shocked because he was in Washington, D.C., talking to this priest, who the priest goes to McCarrick and says, well, I'm gay and I've fallen in love and I have this lover. And McCarrick's advice to him was, well, just get an apartment right next to each other and don't tell anybody about it. And he says, and make sure you preach always about being against the gays so nobody figures it out. And I know that's the shocking part. So this priest tells me this about this cardinal, and I'm like, could that be true? because he openly talks like this. You like be anti-gay, but have this secret life going on. And then, actually, I think it was last summer, and after the McCarrick scandal hit, I was in Notre Dame on this conference, and there's this New Jersey priest there who really was a great priest. I was impressed with him. And so, have to get the 411 from him, because he would have grown up when McCarrick was doing all these things. He would have been a seminarian. And he said something really interesting. He said, everybody knew. Everybody knew. Those people that are claiming, oh, he sexually molested me or put his hands on me, you knew exactly what the deal was. He says, I was never invited to the summer house because I wouldn't tolerate that. It was only those who were kind of in his camp. Does that make sense? So, what's that?
Vulnerable. They were vulnerable.
Not vulnerable. They knew what the score was. All of them knew what the score was. The victims, yeah, they were. And this sounds kind of strange. When he said that, I thought, yeah, I guess that would be a little bit true, because when I was at Mount Angel, which is a very conservative seminary, there was one person in the hierarchy who this other seminarian told me, he says, oh, be careful around him because he likes to kiss your neck. I was like, what? And I remember I just kind of stunned. And so this other friend of mine, he really wanted to become a bishop. That's what he wanted most in life. And so I went and I asked him, I says, there's a rumor going around that he'll try and kiss your neck. And so my friend says, well, it's just more like a peck on the neck. And I said, why don't you punch him in the face? And he says, it doesn't really do anything. He's just giving you a little sign of affection. What? And I remember thinking, oh my God, you would do anything to become a bishop. Does that make sense? So when the New Jersey priest said that, I was like, I can see exactly the type that were invited to the summer house. And he had a lot more scandals that they weren't even serious about becoming priests, some of them. They were put on the diocesan payroll. Seriously, they were put on the diocesan payroll with no intention of becoming priests. Now, I don't know if I should mention this, but I'll mention this.
Turn the light on.
Well, no, actually, But we had a similar scandal in Idaho, where, and nothing was done to the priest who put people on payroll who were more of his friends. So anyhow, a couple of the laity found out about it, and when Bishop Peter came, they told Peter, and Bishop Peter asked the priest to leave. So the thing about it is that you had these payoffs, but here's the thing that really drove me up a wall. If I knew in Boise, Idaho, you cannot tell me the hierarchy in the East Coast and the Vatican didn't know the same stories. I, as a parish priest in a rural diocese that nobody knows where Meridian, Idaho is, you can't tell me the Vatican people didn't know. What's that?
Yes, they do. People keep coming here.
Yeah, but I'm not in the power circles. If I could hear the stories. And then it comes out that McCarrick, who is under investigation, was paying people off, not just all these Vatican officials. And the only common denominator all these Vatican officials got as Christmas gifts for thousands and thousands of dollars is they were all on the chain of command that were investigating him. Then you had the West Virginia bishop. I don't know if you know that scandal. The West Virginia bishop was accused of kind of the same things. And that's a poor diocese. And this other bishop, Laurie, was supposed to be investigating him. Well, he got Christmas gifts for thousands and thousands of dollars. So my only point being is that McCarrick did a great job of mentioning the careerism, but if you're going to outline where the tumor is, let's get a full reading. And come up with changes, such as, these are my changes. Remove all the shows of power. And I know that sounds strange, but Bishop Trinan did here in Idaho. When Bishop Trinan was a bishop, he allowed no monsignors, Because his position was either you're a priest or you're not a priest. These little shows of power, like I paid money so I can be a Monsignor, he was kind of disgusted at the shows of power and prestige. So Trinan didn't allow it. And you have those even today. Remove kind of a power system based on getting a patrician. And what I mean by a patrician is this. This is how Rome works, or the Vatican works, is you go to the Vatican and you try and schmooze a lot of people so that I attach my star to you, and the more you rise in the Vatican position, so do I, which means I have to keep your secrets. The reason why the guy didn't mind the guy kissing on his neck is because his star was going to rise, because this guy had some power. And you can say, well, that can't be true. You know, I mentioned Todd Brown, right? Todd Brown was Bishop of Idaho. And admittedly, I would take a bullet for the guy, swear to God. I think he was a great bishop. He was arrogant when he first came here. Then he has this real humbling and kind of conversion. And he just only won the best for the Catholic Church. And I remember once he said, he was telling me about the Vatican. He says, did you know everyone in my seminary class, and he went to the Vatican, all became priests except for one person. And he had scandals that prevented it. And I said, wow, and I'm so stupid. I said, wow, that's a lot of talent in one class. And Bishop Brown says, no, you're missing the point. Like, that's how stupid I was. It's all this patrician system that, you know, you go to the Vatican, you make as many friends as possible, so when it's come time to name a bishop, somebody knows your name. And you can say, well, what changes can you make? Get rid of the patrician system. You could get rid of it, where the ancient custom, and still theologically a custom, is that the local church elects bishops, not Rome. Now, you could say, well, that's not fair, but that's the way we've always done it. And like, even when I was a deacon, I worked with this priest named Father Don. And Father Don was a great priest. I was just spend my weekends serving with him and learning from him. He was a great priest. And I mentioned to the Bishop Brown, he said, well, who are you doing your pastoral year with? And I said, oh, Father Don. And he says, oh, wow, he was a hot property when he was in Rome. He was like the person everybody thought was going to become a bishop, but he never really amounted to much, just a parish priest. So anyhow, so I mentioned this to Don the next weekend, and he laughs, and he says, yeah, that's true. He said, I went to the seminary in Rome, I knew how the game was played, and I was excellent at playing the game. Even Don said, I didn't even go to classes. I just hung out at museums or coffee shops. I made sure I made a lot of friends in the Vatican, and I was on my way to becoming a bishop, because you need all these connections. And so I said, well, what happened? He says, he said, the night of my ordination, I couldn't sleep. And I was sick because, oh my God, if I become a priest, I'll have to play this game forever. I'll have to play this game forever, and yeah, I'll be a bishop, but I just don't want to do that. He said, so I decided the day I was ordained, I'm only going to be a parish priest. And I gave up my ambitions. And he says, the day you get ordained, you better decide whether you want to be a priest or a bishop. It'll make all the difference. Don had a great priesthood and loved life, etc., etc. When I say do away with careerism, do away with the patrician system, where you spend all your time trying to make contacts. You'll develop the wrong priest. So does that make sense? And this is another one. Welcome honesty. And what I mean by welcome honesty is, so a little business example. So you have this true story. You have this failing company. And the failing company gets this new CEO, and the CEO has these board meetings. And what he wanted in a different section at the board meeting is give a colored report on what's going on in your section. Green meant everything's fine. Red means I'm nervous or there's a problem. And week after week, everybody's reporting green. And then at one meeting, for the first time, this guy reports a red. He says, we're not really, it's some software company. We're not really sure whether this is going to work. We're nervous. And the CEO stood up and applauded. He said, now we can deal with problems. But if you keep giving, you say, oh no, everything's great in my section. Yeah, you've secured your position in front of the board, but you're damaging the company. And so what he really promoted was trust and vulnerability. And like Lencioni has a saying, you can't manage a secret. I mean, that's a mantra. You can't manage a secret. You have to be honest about things. So like if you know Lencioni in business, he'll say, the 5 dysfunction of the team, the first thing you need is trust. And if everybody's lying about how great everything is, you're going to fail as a company. The second thing you need is conflict. And what he means by conflict, if there's a problem, bring it up to the table or the company's not going to survive. That's a lot like priesthood. If we keep all these secrets, and it's about politics, well then the business is going to fail. The church will fail. You have to promote honesty. And like there's this another business example about Polaroid where this CEO Land, no offense to anybody, took over. And they kept telling him that the digital world will take over. And he never thought the digital world would replace chemistry. So Land simply insulated himself with people who never disagreed with him. And so the minority viewpoint was never important. All that mattered is that you never discussed the best course of action. You gave him the information he needs. So here's the question. Is loyalty the same thing as unorthodoxy? Or is loyalty the same thing as being a political sycophant? If you're really loyal to your company, your church, you have to mention the truth. I remember one bishop, he was a bishop in another diocese, was complaining about this parish. There's trouble in a parish. And I was in the sacristy, I was a seminarian setting up, and they said, well, are you going to go talk to these people at the parish? They're having problems there. And he says, no, because they expect me to listen to them. Well, that just means you want to stick your head in the sand. And did you see the 60 Minutes report on Bridgewater investments? Oh, it was so good. So in Bridgewater, Bridgewater made more profits than Apple, Google, and even when the market crashed, Bridgewater warned their investors that this recession was going to happen, so they were prepared. So Bridgewater is like the best investment company. But Bridgewater works by this position that you should voice your concerns. His name is Dolly. He wrote a book. So Dolly said, don't let loyalty get in the way of truth. That's what he wrote in his book, Principles. And oddly enough, the hierarchy of the Catholic Church teaches the very opposite. Don't let truth get in the way of loyalty. Does that mean, like, you have to choose one? And I just think the church could learn a lot from business in Bridgewater. And Bridgewater said this, employees do not have the right to hold a critical opinion unless they speak up about it. Well, the hierarchy kind of teaches the opposite. You just keep your mouth shut. And even like when Bishop Mike was here, the priests had a joke about Bishop Mike. Do you want to hear what the joke was? There are 2 things Bishop Mike will never accept: a bad meal and the truth. Because you just don't bring up problems to him. And so when Barron, God bless him, he mentions a quote-unquote a broken church, really he means a broken hierarchy. When he mentions careerism, he doesn't say, well, how do we fix to make sure any problems are brought up, because there will always be problems. You need honesty. And so there's this proverb that a good man who's become evil is like a polluted water source. And what he means by that is that once you let a good man become polluted, the water source for the entire community, it sickens the entire community. It'll destroy the entire community. So All I'm saying is that you have to allow honesty. So that's one of the career changes that he mentions. It doesn't matter. If you look at from Peter, Damien, it's always the same solutions. One is honesty. This is not in history, but I say this: stop sending priests to treatment. They had this practice when somebody was caught in a scandal, you hushed it up, and then you sent a priest to treatment. Repression therapy doesn't work. And I've known several priests that gone to therapy for alcoholism or depression or whatever. And so in this diocese, we've had, that I know of, 11 priests go to treatment for several months. 3 of them came back okay. So, and think about this, it's $250,000 to send somebody to therapy for one of these treatment houses for several months. So only 3 of them worked. I just think if it's 3 and it's, stop sending them to treatment. Get them. It depends what the sin is. It's alcoholism. There's plenty of people that there's in-house treatments. If there's depression, there's in-house treatment. If it's pedophilia or sexual scandal, bye. We're not covering up. It never, ever works. Stop doing it. That's only but what can I learn from history? Yeah, I can learn those things. Do exactly what every century needed. The patron system, honesty, stop sending people to treatment. It's pretty easy. So going back to the questions. Yes. Hold on. She actually had her hand up first. Go ahead. Gives me time to eat the donut. I don't know either. That is amazing. No, seriously. You kind of think there'd be this honesty of, oh my God, the Fauché thing happens. Nothing's discussed. One priest, and he's a really obnoxious priest. His name is Tim Ritchie. And, I love to sit he's a close friend. But I always love to sit next to him in priest meetings or ordinations because his mouth is just... Anyhow, so Bishop Peter, God bless him, has a priest together and he's having a meeting. He says, now, he gives a report of the diocese. Is there any questions? Is there any questions whatsoever? And Tim Ritchie, he loves throwing out a grenade. And so he raises his hand and says, yeah, Father so-and-so just suddenly disappeared and nobody knows what happened to him. And swear to God, Bishop Peter says, oh, we don't talk about those things. So it just seems so strange that a priest is suddenly missing for 3 months and we don't talk about those things.
And I realize it's a hierarchy, but it has to start somewhere. And it seems like it should be addressed.
I'm sorry, my background is accounting business. Not that I was to school. You can learn a lot from business companies. If you don't talk about a problem, it just gets worse. I know it's uncomfortable. I don't like it, but if the light doesn't shine on the darkness, it just grows. So, yeah. Uh-huh. You have your hand up.
I forgot what I was, no. They thought it worked for years. In fact, there's a recent article in Psychology Today by a PhD psychologist who has studied this subject not only in the church but in secular institutions.
That is true. He makes a very good point.
Yeah.
And the point was, they actually had all this stuff saying it worked. It didn't work. You just had people who lied. Like Steve Ricavina and I once were talking to this.
Medical practices of leeching and bleeding and
You're right. It's like medical practice of leeching. Everybody thought it worked.
Yeah,
You're right.
They did it for decades because they believed it worked.
That's
And-
true.
And occasionally they had some evidence of improvement.
I should say that bishops did think it worked.
Yeah.
Everybody did. But
Everybody did.
sending somebody to treatment.
Therapy.
But this therapy, some therapy does work. With pedophiles, it never works. And this one priest who was always caught in, not pedophilia, but sexual scandals, had been sent to treatment a couple times. And he says to Steve Ricavina and I, he says, I just go there and I play the game they want me to play. And Steve and I, more Steve because he can't control himself, was pissed because you son of a gun. They're playing, so you're right. But now, bishops did think that. I should give them, they were taught this works, but now we know it doesn't work. So let's not do that anymore.
The flip side is I gave up my MFT, Marriage Family Therapy license in California because the legislators in that state, in their infinite wisdom, decided to outlaw reparative therapy. If you don't know what that is, that's where a minor, in the law anyway, under 18, who comes to you, mom or dad, and says, I'm having same-sex feelings. Can you help me? It scares me. I don't like it. And I'd like to. And so dad will say, well, I'll hire a therapist, pay for the therapy for you. Well,
Okay, only because not everybody can hear you. Can I just edit what you're saying?
No, okay.
California just screwed up.
Again.
No, it's true. But you make a good point. Yeah, you have all these politicking controlling what works and what doesn't work because I have my agenda. Which only emphasizes, we need honesty. So, any other opinion, questions about the history? Jim?
Doesn't the laity have a role in the hierarchy of authority of the church? I've heard you comment on that before, and I think it's a little unfair to lay all this off on the bishops and the priests, so forth, and say, why don't they do something about it? What can you reiterate the role that the laity plays?
Okay, so I do think the laity do have a role, obviously. I guess I should have thought about that. Thank you, Jim. Because you're right, I laid most of it on the bishop. But I do think the laity have a role, except I was going to talk about that in the next chapter. You know what you know how last time I kept saying, that's in chapter 3, we're not talking about that. I'm going to say, Jim, that was in chapter 2, we're not going to talk about that. You know what, I do want to talk about that more coming up, but I will say, even historically, and I can say this, historically, and this is part of our Catholic theology, it's called the sensus fidelium, that the hierarchy can do one thing, but do you guys know what the sensus fidelium is? Okay, so I'm sure that's what Jim was actually referring to. But so from ancient times, we believe that there's complementary authority in the Catholic Church. There's scripture, there's tradition. One isn't over another, they're complementary. And there's the magisterium, the bishops. But there's also the sensus fidelium. By rite of baptism, everybody who's been baptized has the Holy Spirit in them. And that is an authority that you must listen to. So that the hierarchy can make like a pronouncement on some law. But if the sensus fidelium doesn't agree to it over a certain period of time, I think it's 25 years in canon law, but don't quote me on that, it no longer has the force of law. And if you study church history, and this is actually, I think, Jim's point, if you study church history, there's been times of scandals where, like, for example, a heresy will come out, and the bishops aren't doing anything about it. And it was the sensus fidelium who then charged the bishops to change. An example would be the heresy of Arianism. It was growing even among bishops. And this weird thing happened that pretty much overnight the laity basically stood up and says, We don't believe that. No more of that. And the bishops conformed. So there is kind of, yes, a role of the laity, and that's a sensus fidelium of the church. And this has happened many times through history. The laity saying, stop it, get on board. And it was the laity that led the bishops. It's a strange thing, but yes, we do believe the Holy Spirit can work through the laity. So you're right, even in this scandal, I think once again it's the laity that's got to speak up. Is that what you meant, Jim?
It's just, I've heard in several of the returning Catholic class, when you talked about authority of the church, you brought up the role of the laity, and so I think it's an important role, especially in a case like this.
Yes, I can't believe I missed that, but I like to bash bishops. But you're right, the laity has a responsibility to man better.
Did the laity help bring the McCarrick scandal into light?
No.
Focus? Who did that?
American press.
Well, it was the American press, but I think some priest must have told the American press that. But I think,
Victims?
I don't think it was victims. Because there was a lot of priests who were quite angry about it. Like this New Jersey priest said, I don't want to badmouth. He was nicer than I am. He says, I don't want to badmouth, but there were many of us who were just disgusted by it. So all you have to do is go to the press at that point.
So why is, if the New Jersey priest is disgusted by it, why isn't he shining the light?
That's a really odd thing. Like, you would know, but who are you going to shine it to?
Well,
You're going to report to the bishop that you're a horrible person?
a different bishop?
Yeah.
So what's the answer then? You're saying Bishop Barron should have more, he should be harder on the bishops?
He should demand solutions. Rather than just say there is careerism, rather than just mention the McCarrick, what can we do to prevent the McCarrick scandal happening again?
And that includes shining the light, right?
Yeah, and you know what though? If I was a priest in New Jersey, I wouldn't go to the bishop. I wouldn't go to the Vatican.
What would you do?
I would go to the press and then say, keep my name out of it. No, but like, that's because,
But
it
isn't
isn't.
that the silence that you're talking about that is so,
McCarrick literally paid off all these people that were supposed to be investigating him. So going to them would do no good.
okay, but if you go to the press,
Yes, I would go to the press, but I'd keep my mouth shut. I mean, keep my name out of it, not shut.
So I was reading this article the other day, and it mentioned a priest, he died a couple years ago, I think his name was Singh. And
She was reading an article about a priest named
And
Singh.
he's a priest and a psychologist, and he's written books about celibacy and priests.
He's a priest who wrote books about celibacy and priests.
And he discovered when he started his research, the first thing he discovered was that any point in time, 50% of the clergy in the Catholic Church are not celibate. They're not pedophiles, but they're not celibate, okay? And so what that does, it creates this culture of secrecy.
So he mentioned, she said 50% of the priests at any one time are not being celibate, and it creates this culture of secrecy.
And bishops and monks and everybody.
Well,
okay?
not monks.
And so it creates this culture of celibacy. So when a pedophile shows up, guess what?
They keep it secret.
They keep it secret.
I would say she's actually right.
They
Like,
have something on you. So if the bishop is not celibate, then
I-
they tell the bishop, and he keeps quiet because he doesn't want to be.
okay,
bad.
can I give my reaction to that? I think you're right, Donna. I think that secrecy is probably true. And I remember I was shocked. Like, I really am so naive. I remember the very first time that happened. I was just couldn't sleep, shocked to find out a priest had a girlfriend. And I was in South America at the time. Anyhow, and I just was shocked. And this is so I went to this other priest, and he said, in South America, most of the priests have a girlfriend. In Africa, most of the priests have a wife. And I couldn't believe that. So I was at the U of I, I was a priest at the U of I, and I was talking to these Africans who were very devout Catholics from Togo, the country of Togo. And they said, well, all the priests have wives. We just ignore that. And they were not seminarians, they were just regular laity. And I said, what? He says, yeah, that's just how our culture works. Nobody expects a priest to be celibate. And like, I remember thinking, is Idaho the only? And here's the other thing, this is the other thing. Celibacy, or like, a lot of the older priests I know have fallen in love. It happens. Human beings fall in love. That's not the same thing as pedophilia, but it does create this culture of secrecy. Where that's the problem. And even like one priest who I really honestly love, he is a great priest, retired, but he shocked me because this really shocked me because he told me that he had fallen in love. And he was an older priest, so I was like, what? He had fallen in love, but he wanted to stay a priest. So, and he talked to me after this, and he said, I went up into the mountain with a gun, and I was going to kill myself because just couldn't stand it. I was like, wow, he's in a lot of pain. But who could he go to? Yes.
So the solution is eliminate celibacy, allow them to be married, and then you don't have
Okay,
to have
so
secrecy
can I
to solve a lot of other problems.
Okay, but can I address that? Because that's like we have to change the system, but I do think we have to be very wary of quick fix solutions. Like remember Peter Damian. This guy said, oh, fire them all and rehire new ones. Well, no, you haven't changed the environment that they exist. And then Peter Damian says, no, you got to change it, get rid of the bad ones, but you got to change the environment that this doesn't happen again. And the Pope chooses a quick fix solution. Oh, we'll just make everybody celibate. Well, there you go. But remember, marriage is not a solution to sexual abuse. So that's my first one. No. You address a culture of secrecy, that's true. And countless children have been abused by family members and who are married. Does that mean, so that won't really address the sexual abuse crisis. And here's the other thing. I know this sounds kind of strange, but if somebody's not a functioning, healthy priest, they're not going to be a functioning, healthy husband. So I do think you're right. Celibacy has to be examined. I honestly do. That's my opinion. I'm not against celibacy. But now you have, I know a lot of good men who left the seminary, really great men, because they don't mind poverty. They don't mind working hard. They just don't want to be lonely. That's a different reason to address it, that we're cutting ourselves off some really great people. And then what you get is people that they couldn't enter into a healthy marriage anyhow because they're kind of dysfunctional, and well, then I must have a vocation. No? But, like, I know this sounds kind of strange. So that's two different things. One, address celibacy because you're losing vocations. That has nothing to do with a scandal. That's just common sense. Second part you said is really right. The culture of secrecy has to end. Well, I know this sounds kind of strange. Really, like Lencioni, I wish bishops would learn from business. In business, you have to have everybody put things on the table. And like, I have to admit, like Todd Brown, two of my friends fell in love. And Todd Brown, they met with Todd Brown, and I asked, how was Todd Brown? And both of them said, well, one of them said, oh, he was great. He says, I know this is difficult. You fall in love. I know it's difficult. I will help you in any way I can. I'll get you help. If you want to leave, let's get you treatment first and make sure your head is on right. But the one thing Todd Brown said is, the only thing I ask is never lie to me. You know, I don't care what happened. I care that you not lie to me. Another friend falls in love, kind of has a problem, and goes to Todd Brown. Todd Brown says, I'll give you treatment, we'll work with you. And Todd Brown says, just don't lie to me. You have to be completely upfront. The guy chose to lie about everything. One stayed in the priesthood, is a good priest. The other one left. I'm not saying he's a bad person, but there are ways in business and in the church to really demand honesty. The whole celibacy issue, you're right. I hate to say this, many priests throughout their priesthood, or in parts of their priesthood, are not celibate. They fall in love. Did you see the movie? I forgot, it was Ben Stiller and some other guy, a priest and a rabbi. So it's a funny thing where the priest falls in love with the rabbi's girlfriend. He falls in love with her. And he doesn't know that she's dating the rabbi. And he's in love with her. And she goes and she says, I have to be honest to you about something. She says, I've fallen in love, and he thinks it's him. And he says, oh my God, I've been so in love with you. And he says this. And she says, no. And he says, I know. Celibacy is a turnoff for a lot of women. In the movie, I know it's kind of funny. Then in the movie, I thought this was really funny. He's a young associate, so he goes to the older Polish priest. And I just thought this was a great line. The older priest, he talks to the older priest, and the older priest says, you're going to fall in love every 10 years. He said, but, he talks to him a lot about how you have to be honest about it, and as long as it's you in this secret, it's going to damage you. Gives this kind of great speech. That's all I think, on the celibacy issue. Celibacy will not prevent the worst of the scandal, but it will allow for more honesty. That's all I'm saying.
So,
Yes.
so the celibacy is in the news a lot right now because Benedict and Francis.
Yeah, Benedict and Francis disagree on it, but I have to admit, I don't think Benedict wants to look like, here's the other part of the scandal. I don't know if you know this, but as part of Benedict's resigning is that Rome under John Paul II and Benedict was a cesspool of sexual scandals, especially the seminaries. Just massive, everybody knew Roman seminaries were sexual scandals. And God bless both. Those are two people who did not want to look at any, they judged orthodoxy by agreeing to things, not to what's really going on. Francis, I have a friend who works in the Vatican, really holy guy, 10 times holier than I am. No, he really is a holy guy, but he applauds Francis. Not that he agrees with everything with Francis, but you don't have to. He applauds Francis because Francis is trying to bring about honesty. He's trying to take away the corruption of the wealth. At least he's bringing honesty to a sick problem. So, yeah, Benedict and Francis disagree with it, but no offense to Benedict. He's not one who really, his way of covering a problem is simply not to acknowledge it. So, yeah.
Is there any source that you can let us know that would give actual statistics on the scandal as far as what's pedophilia, what's homosexuality, what's, consenting adults? I mean, I think that we get so many different mixed messages out
Yeah,
there.
I don't know, nor do I trust those. Do you know, came out with, this is a different subject. They came out with a statistic on occupations. Do you know what occupation is most likely to have an affair? No, swear to God, we were laughing about this in the office because I found this article, right? And we're laughing because two of the staff members have engineers as husbands, and it was engineers. And we're all like, no, it's just that the engineers, when asked the question, a lawyer would be like, I don't know if I'd call that an affair, so that's a no. But an engineer, everything's black and white, so, oh yeah, that's an affair. So even we start to laugh, even the witness, no, it's because engineers won't hedge. It either is 12, it's either, X or not X. So a lot of that is based on self-reporting. Does that make sense? So just like I don't believe engineers are probably the least, they're just the most honest about it. So all that's kind of murky.
But how do you address the issue if you don't even know what the problems are?
We know what the problems are. You don't have a full measurement of the problems, and that's why I think Barron missed it by saying we need this call of complete honesty. Even if it's embarrassing, even if it's whatever. How can you deal with a problem if you say, well, we're just not going to talk about those things?
Okay, so the question is, who is going to stand up and start doing something about getting the honesty? In other words...
Okay, so once again, that's chapter 4. Oh, that's actually chapter 5, yeah, sorry. But like the way ahead, I know this is kind of depressing, you can tell because there's less people, but all we have to do is we're looking at history, and everything from this point on is history. So you first have to be able to be honest and look at all these problems before you say, okay, now what are we going to do? Now I think there is things we can do, but that's the next chapter. There is. I think there's hope. But let's first at least acknowledge, no offense, even what Donna said, great. Let's put that on the table that we need more honesty there.
Is the rate of pedophilia in the United States higher than other countries?
We don't know. We don't know if the pedophilia rate for priests is actually really, really low.
Right.
The problem is that they're covering up.
Right.
But everybody covered it up. And then you had this really weird thing where, I remember when it broke, where some countries are saying, well, we don't have that in our country. And then you find out, oh my God, it's in that country. They just don't believe in talking about it in that country. Like Poland. They were saying, oh, Poland doesn't have any. Now it turns out that they did. They just didn't like to admit it.
My mother was born in Ireland. She used to also say there were homosexuals in Ireland.
Actually, when I was in the seminary, there's the Polynesians, and I loved the Samoans. And the Samoans used to say, well, there's no homosexuality in Polynesia or in Samoa. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then once he slipped that one of his is gay. Anyhow, so I said, I thought you said there's no homosexuals in Samoa. And he says, well, we don't talk about it. I was like, you just admitted it. So yeah, it's what you want to look at.
You think you can't do anything about it, but this is like in the early 80s, we lived in Bozeman, Montana. We had the coolest priest, young priest, come to the house, play basketball with the kids. Well, he sexually abused one of my dear friend's sons. And when she went to the church to raise Cain about it, they weren't going to open his files. They stayed with it until he was no longer a priest.
Good for them. Okay, so since we're headed there, can we head in? Oh no, we have an hour. Okay. Well, I was going to go on what to do, where we can go, but sadly, should we save that for next time? Do you mind or? Okay. Overall, is this too? Oh, go. You have a question. I know. To be honest, I was hoping this would wrap it up. We could do with analyzing the problem and where to go. I was hoping this one, and then next class I was going to do on where to go. Also, the power of shaming, power of getting out of shame, which I think really controls the church in many ways. Just the power of shame that we're not going to. Anyhow, so I'll try and fit in next time. But so I just want a little bit of feedback. Is this still too dark for people?
I think the weather probably kept people away this morning.
Well, either that, I know I seem harsh on Barron, but to be honest, I'm a huge fan of Barron. Because without Barron, we would not be having this class. Without Barron, I hate to say this, even everything I said, most of you would be like, that can't be true. if a year ago, if I said, oh, I know this McCarrick who blah, 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 I don't think most people would believe it.
Oh, yeah.
Barron allows, yeah, I know I do think he pulls punches, but I also recognize, I just talk about a problem with both shotguns, and he's more elegant. I think he more wedged the door open to talk about it.
He uses big words that we don't know.
Maybe.
I don't think this is too dark. I think we should have been talking about this 25 years ago.
No, that's why.
Really, what took us so long? Really, I mean,
Nobody
it was just one after another, and
I honestly don't think, I was a priest when I was found out some priests had girlfriends. I had been ordained already, and it's like, wow, I didn't know that. So, you can only talk about something, some people might have known, but I know me, I'd find it hard to believe. Well, if you told me all this stuff when I was ordained, I just don't think I'd believe it. I never heard or saw this.
So it's secrecy and denial.
It's secrecy, it's denial, yeah.
There's a lot of dysfunction or defense mechanisms going on.
And the floodgates are going to be open. Once you start talking about one problem and you're honest about that, it's like, and that's a problem too, and that's a problem, and it seems overwhelming. But secrecy and denial.
I have another question. It's communication related, not necessarily to pedophilia. So my understanding is that our bishop has his ad limina visit with the Pope on February the 3rd. Does he seek information from the priests in his diocese so he knows how to represent them to the
Okay,
Pope?
so our bishop has his ad liminal visit with every few years. Popes meet their bishops, but I actually asked one bishop what that was like, and okay, so it's all the same. Trinan said it was this way. They take you to a series of rooms, and remember, Trinan really very holy, very humble, and as he said, it was a cockeyed way of running a church, was his comment, because they take you to these rooms to show you how opulent and powerful the Vatican is. Does that make sense? And there's this series of psychological tricks that it only disgusted Trinan. So you have these series, and then you meet with the Pope, which is a true honor, but you have 5 or 7 minutes, and the Pope says, well, how many baptisms? Not Francis, the previous Pope would say, how many baptisms in your diocese? So good. And if you have 5 minutes to talk about a whole diocese, how many, and there's these pre-questions of how many baptisms, how many confirmations, but you don't have time to talk about anything meaty. You know what I mean? So a bishop meeting with a pope, it's a nice idea, it's canon law, but nothing really happens with that.
What about the USCCB?
That's a different issue.
Get input from you for that.
It's the USCCB who should be being honest. But then you get the same problem of people are uncomfortable with truth. So you have secrecy and denial. Really, I know I'm kind of strange, but you need a whole Lencioni program for the church of let's build trust, let's build conflict. You must have honesty. There's a whole program before. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Somebody over there had a hand up. Yeah.
Well, I'm reflecting because I retired recently after 25 years in law enforcement.
She's retired after 25 years of law enforcement.
Well, thank you. But what I'm saying and what I'm seeing is your mind plays all these things that have happened, and I take comfort in knowing that we're not the only ones, and I think that's obvious. But when I came over from Portland to Meridian, friends of mine that were in the same field came over, and they had this big meeting with the largest denomination here because they too were doing the same thing, in that they were not reporting and they would.
Oh yeah, this is not unique to the Catholic Church.
No,
everything we said about secrecy and denial is in every church. And some business.
Well, a good example that I will be quiet, but when you're discussing it, you have this one person that was pretty prevalent in his pervertedness, I guess. And he was, you know, whose feet do you lay it upon? So he was a bishop in the LDS church. He was a lieutenant at Boise Police Department, and he was also a Boy Scout leader. So whose feet do you lay it on? You know, and that's not a comfort to many people, but it just happens, and so it's not just.
It happens in every section of life, but so can I just end with this once again from reading about Proverbs and light? Okay, so live as children of the light, for the light produces every kind of goodness and righteousness and truth. Try to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the fruitless works of darkness. Rather, expose them, for it is shameful to even mention these things done in secret. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible. For everything that becomes visible is light. Like, we're supposed to expose it. Doesn't matter what it is. All right, have to go. So thank you guys so much.